Welcome. Settle in, take a deep breath, and allow your body to soften into stillness. Tonight, we invite you to journey into a world both familiar and far away, dusty frontier marked by harsh landscapes, slower time, and a life lived on the fringes of civilization. You are about to explore the often overlooked rhythms of life in the Wild West, but not the kind sung about in ballads or dramatized in silver screen showdowns. This is a quieter history, a rougher one, less about duels at high noon, and more about the endless stretch of sun-baked trails, the creak of worn leather, and the cold metal weight of stolen coins hidden in dusty saddlebags. Our focus is on the lives of bandits, the men and occasionally women who operated outside the laws of the American frontier in the 19th century. Their days were not full of glamour or glory, but of long rides, wary glances, and fleeting shadows under moonlight. They were shaped by desperation, shaped the myths of a young country, and ultimately faded into the margins of history. Tonight, we will take a closer look. We will listen not for gunshots, but for the quiet hum of wind over prairie grass, the murmured plans beside dying campfires, and the hollow clink of silver in a canvas sack. Let us begin, then, at the beginning, not with a name or a legend, but with the ordinary texture of everyday life lived outside the law. Imagine yourself waking under a brittle dawn sky. The cold of the night still clings to your skin, and the dew on your wool blanket feels like it was stitched with ice. There's no bed, no roof, no coffee brewed in a tidy kitchen, just a flat stretch of dry earth beneath you, a crumpled hat shading your eyes, and the silhouette of your horse grazing nearby. This is morning, in the world of a 19th century bandit. A typical day for a bandit in the Wild West began not with ambition, but with necessity. There was no schedule, except for the pressure to stay ahead of lawmen, bounty hunters, or rival gangs. Each morning was a question. Where next? How far? How fast? How quiet must one travel to remain unseen? You stir embers from last night's fire, coaxing enough warmth to heat a tin of beans or char a slice of hard bread. Meat is rare, most of it dried or stolen. Sometimes, if luck and proximity allow, a stolen chicken or a pouch of flour finds its way into a thin, greasy stew. But often, meals are eaten cold, fingers numb, eyes scanning the horizon. The saddle is your constant companion. It wears down not just the horse, but your own muscles and mind. You ride with everything you own most, likely a rifle or revolver, a small pouch of ammunition, maybe a razor, though most bandits' beards grew unchecked, a length of rope, a tin cup, a pocket knife, and a worn shirt might complete your possessions. Hygiene is a forgotten concept. Streams offer moments of relief, quick washes, a chance to refill canteens, maybe soak aching feet. But they're also places of risk. Water sources mean traffic. Traffic means discovery. Bandits learned to move with caution, to stay hidden behind ridges or in dry arroyos, always choosing routes that horses could manage, but few would follow. Shelter came from caves, overhangs, or the occasional decrepit cabin, left to ruin by settlers who had either moved on or fallen victim to the harsh realities of the frontier. Nights were long. In winter, especially, they were punishing. There was no luxury of fire unless safety could be assured. Often the flame was kept low, or not at all, leaving bodies to shiver beneath ragged wool and thick silence. Loneliness was ever present. Though many bandits traveled in small groups, camaraderie was brittle-based, more on mutual need than trust. One betrayal could mean capture, or worse. Conversations were sparse and practical. Boasts, if shared at all, were murmured by firelight, coated in smoke and wary laughter. The horse, more than any human, was a bandit's truest companion. These animals were not luxuries, they were lifelines. Bandits knew their horses better than their own kin. A sturdy steed could mean the difference between freedom and a rope around the neck. Horses were stolen, traded, and occasionally killed to prevent pursuit. Riders grew attuned to their animal's mood, pace, and breath. A single misstep could give away a trail. Occasionally, days were spent not in movement, but in waiting camped out near a bank, a train route, or a telegraph line. Here, the stillness was hardest. Boredom clawed at the edges of discipline. Nerves wore thin. Every distant footfall, every cry of a hawk, was a potential warning sign. And yet, there was also a strange rhythm to it all, a meditative, harsh simplicity. In this life, decisions were few, but weighty. Food, shelter, safety, direction. The present loomed large. The future was often left unconsidered. As the day wore on, the sun climbing high over the empty land, you might pass through the ghost of a trailing old wagon rut, a discarded boot, a coyote skull whitening in the sand. And in those brief encounters with evidence of others, you might remember, faintly, a world where laws mattered, and people lived with plans and futures. But for now, for the outlaw, the day continues much as it began, quietly, tensely, and with the persistent whisper of wind over scrub and stone. Among the myriad figures that drifted through the annals of the American West, a few bandits left behind stories that flicker, dimly, through dusty records and whispered legend. Their names, often misremembered or deliberately altered, became more than identities. They became warnings, campfire tales, or, occasionally, crude icons of rebellion. Tonight, we consider one such figure, William McCarty, more widely remembered as Billy the Kid. Born in 1859, likely in New York City, McCarty's early life was marked by instability. Orphaned as a teenager, he moved westward, like so many others seeking opportunity on the far fringes of the nation. His youth was not so much corrupted as it was shaped by hardship. He began with petty theft and ill-fated decision to steal food, then clothing. The punishments were swift and disproportionate. Jail came early, and with it, escape. By the age of 15, he was on the run. Billy drifted through Arizona Territory, then New Mexico. The lines between survival and outlawry blurred with every dusty mile. In a landscape where justice was often carried out with a bullet or a rope, violence followed him as closely as his own shadow. He killed, though never without cause, or at least, not without rationale. Whether it was a card game gone wrong, a cattle dispute, or self-defense in the chaotic Lincoln County War, Billy's actions were never far from a weapon's reach. The Lincoln County War itself was not a war in the traditional sense. Rather, it was a bitter feud between rival merchants, ranchers, and the men they employed, many of whom were armed. Billy sided with the so-called regulators, a group seeking retribution after the murder of a sympathetic employer. What followed was a series of ambushes, gunfights, and betrayals that scattered blood across the New Mexico desert. Billy's fame grew not through any grand gesture, but because he survived. He escaped jail multiple times, once slipping his cuffs with ease, another time killing 2 deputies and fleeing into the night. Each escape added another layer to the myth. Newspapers, desperate for drama, dubbed him the Kid, often exaggerating his age and crimes. In truth, he was scarcely 20 when his name became notorious. And yet, for all the chaos that clung to him, those who knew Billy often described him as soft-spoken, even polite. He played the fiddle. He could read and write. He was known to smile easily. In another life, in another place, perhaps he might have been a rancher, a teacher, or a musician. But the road he walked lined with rough companions and suspicious lawmen offered no such peace. Eventually, law caught up with legend. Sheriff Pat Garrett, once friendly with Billy, was deputized to bring him in. After a brief capture, Billy again escaped, only to be cornered some months later at Fort Sumner. Garrett, it is said, shot him in the dark, without warning. A quiet end, far from any duel or ballad, just a single shot and silence. Billy the Kid was dead at the age of 21. His story, while often romanticized, was not unique. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of young men fell into outlawry in the West, propelled not by villainy, but by the sheer weight of circumstance. Some were driven by revenge, others by poverty, a few, perhaps, by thrill. But more often than not, they were simply lost souls in a land too vast, too indifferent, to offer comfort. Their stories follow similar arcs: birth in anonymity, drift toward the frontier, a string of minor offences escalating to violence, brief notoriety, and then either death or disappearance. The West, vast and unconcerned, forgot most of them quickly, but a few lingered, like the echo of hoofbeats over dry stone, not because they were heroes, but because they stood at the intersection of myth and memory, law and lawlessness, and because, in their short lives, they embodied the harsh contradictions of the American frontier. We now turn from these singular lives to the landscape they inhabited own that held its own secrets, shadows, and silent witnesses to a world on the edge of civilization. Now, close your eyes and picture this: a weathered canyon bathed in pale twilight, its walls streaked with ancient mineral veins, and silent but for the wind threading through crevices. Somewhere in its folds lies a shadowy hollow nearly invisible from the rim, above where a bandit once waited, unmoving, as a posse passed less than 30 feet away. The west was not just wide, it was secretive, full of places to vanish, to rest, to regroup. This was a land riddled with hidden corners, and the outlaws knew them well. Hideouts were not merely convenient, they were essential. They ranged from shallow caves to abandoned cabins, and from sunken arroyos to dense patches of juniper. What mattered most was invisibility. High ground offered sightlines, low ground offered concealment. Often, both were employed. Bandits developed an intimate knowledge of the land, not just trails and water sources, but the shifting play of light at different times of day, the way sound carried in certain gulches, or how hoofprints vanished on rocky ground. One such hideout, remote and nearly unreachable, was Robber's Roost, located in the heart of Utah's canyon country. There, amid labyrinthine red rock, Butch Cassidy and his wild bunch found refuge. Narrow slot canyons disguised their approach. Natural cisterns provided water. From this base, they planned raids on banks, trains, and payroll shipments, returning to safety long before word of their crimes had traveled. These hideouts often bore subtle mark-etched symbols on tree trunks or rocks, visible only to those who knew what to seek. A bent branch might indicate a safe route. A scratched crescent moon might signal a camp with supplies. These were not elaborate codes, but simple field signs, passed by tradition among those who lived just beyond the reach of the law. Sometimes, such symbols drifted into the domain of folklore. Stories spoke of bandits burying treasure, marking its location with arcane signs, an X on a weathered boulder, or a triangle of stones arranged just so. Few, if any, of these treasures were ever found. Whether they existed at all is a matter of debate, but their legends lingered fuel for countless treasure hunters long after the West had settled into a quieter time. In some parts of the frontier, bandits shared roots with older traditions, cultural echoes brought by immigrants or adopted from indigenous peoples. Spanish vaqueros, for instance, left behind a lexicon of hand signals, trail markers, and desert survival tricks that would prove useful to any who lived on the edge. Some outlaws carried silver medallions or charms, not for vanity, but protection. Superstition clung tightly in a land where medicine was scarce and death was never far. Archaeologists, even today, occasionally stumble upon traces of these lives: a rusted spur buried beneath dry loam, a fragment of smoked glass from an outlaw's fire, carved initials in the underside of a rock shelf. These are not grand finds, not the stuff of museums, but they whisper, if one listens closely. They whisper of days spent hiding, waiting, watching. In some remote places, the echoes feel stronger. A crumbling stone chimney in the hills, a trail that starts and ends nowhere. The silence seems to lean in, and you wonder, who slept here once? What lives past like shadows through these hollows? The answers never come in full, but their presence is felt, like footprints just beneath the dust. And so, the mystery endures not in elaborate puzzles, but in these small, fading signs of those who chose to disappear. In the quiet corners of the American West, history does not shout, it murmurs. As we ride slowly forward, we shift our gaze toward the greater society around these hidden lives, the ranchers, merchants, and townsfolk who lived in uneasy contrast to the outlaws in their midst. As the sun set beyond the scrub-brushed horizon, painting the skies with streaks of amber and rust, life in the towns of the American frontier wound down with a kind of practiced, wary rhythm. Here, amid rows of weathered storefronts and simple wooden homes, lived the ordinary citizen settlers, merchants, laborers, and lawmen who occupied the opposite side of the bandits' world. Their days began not on horseback under open skies, but with the scrape of boots on wood floors, the creak of water pumps, and the slow stoking of kitchen fires. Breakfasts were simple: cornmeal mush, biscuits, coffee often brewed thick and bitter in cast-iron pots. Outside, the town stirred gradually to life. A blacksmith's hammer rang out into the still morning air. The grocer lifted his shutters. A teacher swept dust from the steps of a one-room schoolhouse. These people sought to build structure where there had been none to impose routines upon a wild and untamed place. Streets were unpaved and turned to mud with the rain. Cattle wandered freely, and the scent of manure drifted lazily through open windows. Yet there was a kind of order in it all. Children were taught to recite scripture and simple arithmetic. Towns elected marshals. Stores marked goods with price tags. Churches held Sunday services, and bells tolled softly in the breeze. Yet beneath this thin veneer of civilization lay a constant tension. Most knew that order was fragilely kept alive by vigilance, good luck, and the uncertain authority of the law. Marshals and sheriffs were seldom the iron-jawed paragons of legend. More often, they were men pulled from the community itself, former soldiers, drifters with steady hands, or merchants reluctantly pressed into duty. Their tools were not only a badge and a pistol, but local knowledge, patience, and the ability to read people quickly. Law enforcement operated under difficult conditions. There were no forensic labs, no radios, no formal training academies. Arrests were made on word of mouth, with the help of wanted posters printed from faded sketches or written descriptions. Medium height, dark eyes, walks with a limp. A man's reputation could convict or save him. Sometimes, justice was swift, perhaps too swift. Trials were held in modest rooms with few legal formalities. Juries were made of townsfolk who might have known the accused personally. If convicted, punishment varied. A fine, time in a crude jail cell, all as commonly but never far from possibility a noose hung from the nearest tree or gallows. Vigilante justice, carried out by citizens' committees, was not uncommon in remote areas where patience wore thin and the sheriff's reach did not extend. Towns lived with the constant knowledge that outlaws might pass through at any time. Some rode in quietly, buying supplies or whiskey before disappearing again into the hills. Others were less discreet bank robbers, rustlers, stagecoach raiders, who left fear and chaos in their wake. When rumors spread of a nearby gang, shutters were closed early, guns were checked and reloaded. Some merchants hid their cash beneath floorboards or in the linings of their coats. Yet, in many cases, the lines between townsfolk and outlaws were not so rigid. Some outlaws had families in town. Some lawmen had once ridden in less lawful company. Deals were made in secret. Warnings were passed over drinks. The West was still young, and its morality was often circumstantial. To live in a frontier town was to walk a delicate path. One sought stability in an unstable world, planting roots in ground that was still shifting. People built schools and churches, laid down fences and main streets, all the while knowing that lawlessness rode just beyond the horizon. The fear was constant, but so too was resolve. The contrast between these towns and the world of the bandit was sharp, but not always oppositional. They were intertwined two faces of the same uncertain coin, spinning slowly under the weight of an expanding nation. Now, let us quietly turn from the formalities of justice and civil society to another enduring element of bandit life, the long, often lawless roads and the weathered trails of the American West, where time itself seemed to slow. The American West was vast, breathtaking in its scale, yet punishing in its resistance. For the bandit, the land itself was both adversary and accomplice. It hid them when they needed shelter, and broke them when they strayed too far without preparation. Every journey across its terrain was a negotiation, a gamble, a quiet dialogue with the wild. There were few roads, and even fewer that deserved the name. Most were simple wagon rut-steep furrows pressed into the earth by heavy wheels and hoofbeats. Trails like the Santa Fe, the Overland, or the Chisholm connected outposts and towns, threading between mountain ranges, across high deserts, and through parched canyons. To the uninitiated, these trails seemed like lifelines, but to bandits, they were dangerous, too obvious, too well-traveled. Instead, outlaws often chose the forgotten paths, deer tracks, dry creek beds, or narrow goat trails etched into rocky hillsides. These routes demanded familiarity, patience, and a deep trust in one's horse. The terrain varied sharply. In the high country, thin air and snow-choked passes made every breath an effort. Down in the desert basins, heat shimmered against the sand, and the horizon could stretch endlessly, without shade or water. And then there were the rivers, To cross them meant risk currents that could carry away horse and rider alike, or swollen floods after sudden storms. Yet rivers also offered solace, cool water, a place to wash, and if well hidden, an overnight camp beside the trickling hush of the current. One could travel for days without seeing another soul. But silence did not mean safety. A column of dust in the distance could be anything: cowboys, US cavalry, or a sheriff's posse. Each step forward carried its own calculations: distance to the next water source, the health of the horse, the likelihood of pursuit. Despite their danger, trains became a pivotal part of the bandits' world. By the late 1800s, railroads cut across the West like iron veins. They brought settlers, soldiers, money, and the illusion of civilization. For bandits, trains represented both opportunity and threat. A single train might carry thousands in gold, or simply mail and tools. To rob one was a feat of logistics, luck, and ruthless timing. Train robbers studied schedules, watched terrain for the best ambush, points typically gentle grades or bends where the locomotive slowed. They would flag down the train with a lantern or fire a warning shot, then leap aboard. Some disabled the tracks, using tools or stolen dynamite. Once aboard, they worked quickly, first the express car, then the safe, if they could reach it. Time was everything. Within minutes, someone might telegraph ahead, and the chase would begin. When it came, escape was rarely swift. Bandits scattered like smoke, each rider peeling off into different terrain, rendezvousing days later at a predetermined site. The West offered cover, but not mercy. A missed trail could mean dying of thirst. A broken horse meant capture. Every bandit knew stories of those who rode into the desert and were never seen again. But there was beauty too in the land. It is said that some outlaws would pause at the edge of a canyon at dusk, watching as shadows gathered in folds of rock and coyote howls echoed across the hills. In those moments, the vastness of the West could feel almost holier, cathedral of silence and stone. Some claimed it was the only place they ever felt truly free. Freedom, though, came with a price. The terrain could not be bribed, deceived, or outgunned. It simply waited, indifferent to ambition, unmoved by suffering. It shaped the outlaws as surely as it shaped the mountains. And so, we leave behind the winding trails and scorched plains to turn our gaze to another constant companion of the bandit's life: the bounty. The price on a man's head, and the web of hunters and informants drawn to it. In the world of the Wild West, crime was not just rebellion, it was an economy unto itself. Banditry, for all its unpredictability, operated within a kind of shadow market, where stolen goods had value, names had weight, and reputations became a form of currency. The bandit was not always the reckless figure of popular lore. More often, he was a quiet calculator, aware that every risk taken had a co-stand, a price. The most tangible sign of this economy was the bounty, printed in bold on fading posters, pasted to saloon walls and jailhouse doors. The bounty offered a simple exchange: money for a life, dead or alive. These notices bore grainy sketches or hastily written descriptions: sandy-haired, missing finger, last seen near El Paso. Sometimes there was a list of crimes: robbery, assault, mail theft, or just a flat statement: wanted. Beneath it, the reward: $500, $1,000, $5,000 for the most notorious. To understand the power of the bounty is to understand the danger it presented. It turned every citizen into a potential threat. A neighbor might become an informant. A stable boy could recognize a wanted horse. Men who once rode together might betray one another when the price grew high enough. And bounty hunter, some official, many not followed these posters like maps, seeking profit in the trail of blood and dust. These hunters were not always the solemn avengers of dime novels. Many were former outlaws themselves, men who knew the terrain and the tricks. They carried pistols, rope, sometimes manacles, and always questions. Some were brutal. Others preferred to track, to wait, to strike only when escape was impossible. To be pursued by a skilled hunter was to live with the sense that one's footsteps were being read like a book. But it was not just people who changed hands in this dark market. Goods horses, rifles, cash boxes, mailbag shad to be sold, often quickly and always discreetly. Enter the fence, an intermediary, usually operating from behind a shop counter, who purchased stolen goods and redistributed them through back channels. A general store in a dusty town might double as a laundering post for marked bills. A livestock auction might feature cattle with tampered brands. These fences were essential, if unacknowledged, parts of the criminal web. Some were deeply embedded in the local economy, respected merchants, who asked few questions, so long as the goods arrived under cover of night. Others were more clearly underworld figures, operating on the edge of legality, bribing local officials, and moving between towns as suspicion gathered. The bandits themselves understood they were part of a system. A successful robbery of a train, a stagecoach, or a payroll wagon required planning, supplies, and timing. Horses had to be fresh, trails known in advance. Tools like dynamite had to be acquired. Scouts were sent ahead. It was work, and dangerous work at that. And yet, the payoff was rarely extravagant. Stolen coin was often heavy and hard to carry. Paper money might be marked. Gold had to be melted down or carefully traded. Within days or weeks of a heist, much of the take might be spent on new horses, bribes, food, or simply lost in gambling dens. Few outlaws retired wealthy. Most did not live long enough to try. The economy of outlawry was also shaped by its impermanence. Towns changed, lawmen rotated, trails became watched, a fence might disappear, or turn state's witness. A fellow gang member might be captured and talk. Each day brought new risk, new calculations. The life of a bandit was not just dangerous, it was exhausting. And yet, for some, it was worth it. Not for the riches, but for the autonomy. The rejection of a system that had never worked in their favor. The sense of movement, of self-determination, even if it came at the edge of a knife. From this precarious world of stolen goods and shifting loyalties, we now step into the heart of conflict, when the outlaw's path crosses with the forces of law and vengeance. A moment where reputations collide and fates are sealed. It was often at dusk that the world changed for a bandit, the long shadows stretching over prairie grass, the last rays of golden light catching the edge of a rifle barrel from an unseen ridge. This was the hour of reckoning. Conflict did not always announce itself with gunfire or galloping hooves. Sometimes it crept in quietly, a betrayed hideout, a misplaced hoofprint in the mud, a name mentioned in the wrong saloon, overheard by the wrong ears. The capture of an outlaw was rarely a moment of cinematic bravado. More often it was the product of patience and attrition, lawmen tracking for days, listening more than riding, waiting for the slip. An outlaw caught while asleep, or drunk, or simply unaware. Ambushes were the favored method. They spared the townspeople risk and kept the paperwork minimal. A sheriff might wait in a barn loft, or a bounty hunter might pose as a traveler, warming himself by the same campfire. Sometimes, though, the outlaw resisted. A shout, a drawn pistol, and suddenly the calm evening erupted. Yet even these moments passed quickly. Ammunition was precious, and most weapons inaccurate at distance. Skirmishes were chaotic, over in seconds. Then, silence returned heavy, unnerving. The dust settled. A body lay still, or fled into the night, wounded. For those captured alive, the journey back to town was often the cruelest stretch. Hands bound, sometimes tied to a horse or wagon, the outlaw became a spectacle. Townsfolk gathered to see them arrive, this myth now reduced to weary flesh. Children stared. Storekeepers whispered. A trial might be held, though its outcome was usually assured. If the crimes were well known, and the region weary of lawlessness, there might not be a trial at all. Mob justice, while unofficial, was hardly rare. Escapes did happen, slipping a key, sawing through a window frame, or simply bribing a guard. Some outlaws escaped multiple times, each evasion adding to their legend, their notoriety, and the price on their heads. But for every escape, there were dozens who never managed it. For every bullet dodged, a noose waited somewhere else. Consider the end of Jesse James, once a Confederate guerrilla, then a folk hero to some and a menace to others. Jesse was shot not by a lawman, but by a member of his own gang. Robert Ford pulled the trigger while Jesse adjusted a picture on the wall, his back turned, unarmed. The price of fame, it seemed, was trust undone. Others met their fate in lonely places, captured in high mountain cabins, in desert canyons, or in borrowed beds in boarding houses. Their final moments were not always defiant. Many were quiet, almost resigned, worn down by the years of riding, hiding, fearing. The West was not kind to those who lingered on its margins. Yet even in death, the myths grew, stories twisted. A captured outlaw who died in a cell became a martyr in song. A horse thief who vanished in the hills became a ghost, said to ride under moonlight still. Graves were marked with initials, sometimes not at all. The names blurred together: Clayton, Boone, Kid, Jesse, Bell, half real, half legend, fully woven into the tapestry of the West. Conflict shaped these men, but it also erased them. For every tale told, dozens were lost. What remained was not the noise of gunfire or the gallop of escape, but the stillness afterward, the wind against the saloon shutters, the quiet footsteps of a lawman walking back to town, the coiled rope being hung once more in the sheriff's office. From these final reckonings, we turn gently to a quieter space, what remains behind. After all is gone, the legacy, the memory, the myths whispered across generations. As decades passed and the frontier began to fade into memory, the raw dust and grit of outlaw life began to soften, transformed by memory, nostalgia, and invention. The American bandit, once a figure of fear and instability, slowly morphed into something else entirely: a symbol, a story, a character in the growing mythology of the West. The same men who had once crept silently through arroyos, stolen from payroll trains, or vanished into rocky gulches, began to appear in novels, songs, and later, moving pictures. Dime novels were the first to elevate these figures, published in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, sold cheaply and read widely by a public hungry for adventure. In their pages, gunmen became gallant, crimes became quests, hardened thieves became misunderstood rebels. Facts were often discarded. Jesse James became a modern-day Robin Hood. Billy the Kid was reimagined as a brave, tragic youth pushed to violence by unjust forces. Female outlaws like Belle Starr were painted as charming desperados, rather than calculating survivors of a brutal system. The line between history and legend grew faint, then vanished altogether beneath layers of ink and imagination. Hollywood later took up the tale, projecting the silhouettes of outlaws onto silver screens. They rode into sunsets, exchanged clever banter, and shot with unerring accuracy. The complex, weary figures of the past were replaced by polished heroes and charming rogues. The wilderness became a painted backdrop. The danger was stylized, and the loneliness, the hunger, the silent fear that was quietly left out. But beyond the romance, something deeper persisted. The outlaw remained a symbol of resistance against authority, against unfair systems, against the unyielding nature of frontier life. For many, these figures represented the possibility of carving one's own path, however dangerous. They spoke to those who felt hemmed in, overlooked, or powerless. In some communities, especially in the American Southwest, stories of local outlaws were passed down as family lore. A great uncle who once rode with a gang, a grandmother who harbored a fugitive for a night. Whether true or embellished, these stories anchored families to the vastness of the land, making history feel intimate, lived, and close to home. Yet historians continue to study the reality behind the romance. Old court records, newspaper clippings, and faded photographs offer glimpses of the truth-grim, often mundane details that reintroduce us to the complexity of these lives. We learn of sickness, of betrayal, of poor choices made under pressure. We see the slow unraveling of men who lived fast and died younger than they should have. Even today, the outlaw archetype endures, in literature, in film, in quiet conversations around campfires. There is a certain appeal in the idea of a person who, faced with an unforgiving world, chose to live outside its rules. Whether that choice was noble or merely necessary is a matter of interpretation. And so the bandits of the Wild West remain with us not as heroes, not quite as villains, but as echoes. They flicker through the pages of books, the reels of old films, and the corners of museums, reminding us of a time when the land was wide, the law was thin, and freedom was measured not in rights, but in how far one could ride before the sun set. As we prepare to close our journey, let us drift into a final moment of quiet reflection, a gentle return to the present from the harsh landscapes of the past. And now, we return slowly, softly from the harsh edges of the frontier, from the cracked earth, the echoing canyons, and the silent, watchful trails. We leave behind the riders cloaked in dust, the whisper of hooves over dry stone, and the dim glow of a campfire fading into night. The bandits of the Wild West, those restless, untethered figures, live only in shadow now. Their paths have long since vanished beneath asphalt highways and fences. Their hideouts, once secret and sacred, lie empty beneath the stars, known only to wind and time. The landscapes they crossed are quieter now, their dangers tamed, their solitude thinned by settlement and memory. As you rest, consider how different life is today, how far we have come from that raw, unpredictable world. Our lives are shaped not by open skies and rustling brush, but by quiet rooms, familiar routines, soft beds. And yet, something of that world still lingers, somewhere in the corners of the imagination, in the appeal of the wide open, in the ache for silence, in the sense that there was once a time where every direction was uncertain and possible. Perhaps what endures is not the violence or the lawlessness, but the silence of the land, the way the night swallowed sound, the way the stars seemed to burn lower, closer, the way each breath carried the sharp scent of juniper, dust, and distant firewood. Tonight, those stories are simply that, stories, not a call to action, but an invitation to stillness. Let your thoughts drift, untethered like those riders long ago, across imagined ridges and forgotten trails. Let their world dissolve quietly into dreams. For now, all is quiet. Sleep well,